And we're continuing with the 12th chapter of Dragons in the Water by Madeleine L'Engle. This chapter is called The Return of the Phair. If Gutierrez knew the jungle, then so did the Quistanos. In single file, they walked through what appeared to be impenetrable undergrowth. Gutierrez was marched between two of the Indians, as was the soldier whose boot so nearly killed Simon. The arrow had been removed. Gutierrez screamed and howled and cursed. He was the chief of police of Port of Dragons. The Indians would pay for this. Here he was, rescuing Simon. Didn't the fools realize that he, with his helicopter, had found the boy first, and was there to save his life? And for this, he was treated like a criminal. They would all shortly be behind bars. At last, he ran out of wind. The soldier moved along without emotion. His rifle had been taken from him and left in the copter. If the arrow had hurt his foot, he gave no sign. Simon walked with a young Indian who identified himself as Ulde and told him that Canon Talus and Aunt Leonis were waiting for him. After that, there was little conversation. The trip through the jungle used all their lung power and concentration. Simon followed in Ulde's footsteps, and it took every ounce of his failing strength for him to keep up. The heat of the jungle, which hardly affected the Indians, had Simon streaming with sweat. His mouth was so dry that the dryness was pain. Occasionally, Uvalde reached a hand out to help him through a difficult place. Simon tried to conceal the fact that he was so exhausted. He was not certain one foot would continue to follow the next. His breath came in short gasps. He had a stitch in his side which threatened to double him up. Just as he was about to pant out to Uvalde a plea for a moment's rest, the undergrowth cleared, the trees and shrubs were behind them, and they faced the deep blue of Dragon Lake. Two large, open wooden boats were waiting on the beach. Uvalde told Simon to get into the first. Gutierrez and the soldier were hustled into the second, and Gutierrez again began to scream threats and abuse. Instinctively, Simon put his hands over his ears. "It is all right," Uvalde assured him. "He cannot hurt you now. He will be taken directly to Port of Dragons, where Mynheer Vermeer and the police from Caracas will be waiting." "Signor Hurtado!" "His men. Signor Hurtado is at Dragon Lake, and we have the information he and Mynheer Vermeer were seeking. Gutierrez," Uvalde spat the syllables. "Gutierrez," Uvalde spat the syllables. "He was not born with that fine name. One look at him and I could tell he is an Indian from across the border. Not Quistano. No. A tribe of short, stupid people who have almost completely vanished because they have betrayed their own ways. They have no memory. As for that Gutierrez, he is a smuggler." "But he's a policeman." "No. Or so. Not all policemen are Hurtados, any more than all consuls are Vermeers. Being a policeman simplified his dirty work. Very dirty." Simon looked at Uvalde with respect. "Canon Talus suspected he might be into something like that." He gazed somberly at the boat with Gutierrez and the soldier. He gazed somberly as the boat with Gutierrez and the soldier was rowed away. 4 Indians were in the boat with Simon and Uvalde. They rowed swiftly in the opposite direction from the other boat. Uvalde sat in the prow, his back turned to the water, so that he was facing Simon. "We are glad you have come, little brother." "I'm glad too. You saved my life. Gutierrez wasn't rescuing me. That soldier was going to kill me, and Gutierrez wasn't about to stop him. He came just in time." His throat was so parched he could scarcely speak. Uvalde took a small skin bag from his belt and handed it to Simon. "There are only a few swallows, but that is all you should have right now." The swallows were sheer bliss, and Simon handed the empty skin to Uvalde with gratitude. The Indians rowed strongly and swiftly, but it seemed a long time before Simon saw ahead of them the round dwellings on high stilts stretching out into the lake. It was exactly as Charles had described, exactly like the picture he had seen in Jan's book. "Uncle Father, Canon Talus is really there, and Aunt Leonis?" Uvalde smiled slightly. "How many times do I have to tell you? Yes, they are there." The boat swept past the dwellings farthest out in the lake. Uvalde pointed toward it proudly. "This is my dwelling. That is where I bring my betrothed on the night when we two are made a new one." When the boat neared the beach, he held up his hand for silence. A large group was assembled. Simon looked about eagerly, but at first he could not see Aunt Leonis or Canon Talus. Hurtado was clearly visible, standing a little apart from the Indians, with his dark hatchet face and city suit. Uvalde jumped from the boat and helped pull it ashore, then held out his hand to Simon, who jumped out onto the soft sand. From the clearing, a young girl came running out of the large central building, her patterned dress flowing like butterfly wings. She carried a goblet which she offered to Simon. It was half filled with a pale liquid. "We know that you are still thirsty," Uvalde said, "but you have been very long without enough water, and so you must drink only a little at a time. This will help." He drank thirstily, and the golden liquid cooled and healed his throat far more than water would. "Thank you," Simon said. "It has helped." He gave the goblet back to the girl. "Now," Uvalde said, "it is the moment." The group on the shore had turned away from Simon, and the boats were looking back to the greensward. Simon followed their gaze, past an enormous stone-gray statue of a beautifully smiling woman, to a litter being carried by two young Indians. A small figure was crouched on the litter. At first, he thought it was a child. Beside the litter walked two women, one middle-aged, one young. When the litter came closer, he realized the small figure was not a child, but a very old woman, much older than Aunt Leonis. A man in a long white tunic, with white hair down to his shoulders, detached himself from the group and went up to the litter and spoke bravely to the occupant, who raised her hand imperiously and spoke in a cracked and almost whispering voice. The man returned a few words, and Uvalde whispered to Simon, "Umar Zanai and the Umara." The litter bearers carried the old woman up to Simon. He felt a strange constriction in his chest. He held his breath until he thought his lungs would burst, but his gray eyes met the probe of her dark ones. He felt that he was moving out of time and into eternity, that this meeting of eyes would never end, that time had stopped and would never begin to flow again. Then the ancient Umara spoke 3 words in a language completely foreign to Simon, a language fluid as water. Umar's and I came to her and asked her something in the same deep, dark tones. Again she spoke 3 words. The words were whispered from person to person, and then the whole village burst into cries which had a harmonious, musical quality, cries which were certainly sounds of joy. And then Simon saw Aunt Leonis standing in the background next to Canon Tallis, who had been carried out on his light and flexible couch. Simon ran to them, and then he and Aunt Leonis were holding each other, and she was crying, and he was crying, and so was she. And they held each other and rocked back and forth, as they had not since the night Simon's mother had died, but this time the tears were tears of joy. It was some time before he realized that Uvalde was speaking to him, trying to get his attention, speaking formally for the whole village. "She says that you are the one. The Umara says that you are he for whom we wait." Simon pushed the words away. No, I'm only Simon Rainier, from South Carolina. Tell them, Uvalde, please, I can't possibly be the one. Uvalde repeated calmly, "The Umara says that you are the one." "Aunt Leonis, Uncle Father." Uvalde kissed Simon ceremoniously on each cheek and then on the forehead. "We welcome you, Phair." "I'm Simon Bolivar Rainier." Umar's and I stepped forward, giving Simon the 3 ritual kisses. "You are the Phair." "Oh, Aunt Leonis, Uncle Father, please tell them," Simon cried. "I'm not. You mustn't let them think." Umar's and I said, "The Phair promised he would return. Now the Phair has kept his word and the long waiting is over." "But he was a grown man," Simon protested, "and I'm only a boy." There was darkness before his eyes, which was only partly the darkness of approaching night. "You are the blood of his blood," Umar's and I said. Simon paused and then said slowly, "Yes, I am. I too have run away when it was my obligation to stay." "And now you have returned," Umar's and I said. The Umara had been sitting impassively on her litter. Now she gestured again, and the bearers brought her back close to Simon. She put her small and ancient hands up to his face and gave him the 3 kisses of benediction. Then she gestured regally toward her dwelling place, and the bearers carried her away. "Aunt Leonis." "Yes, Simon?" "Well, tell them, ma'am. Please tell them." "What do you want me to tell them, Simon?" "That I'm not Quentin Phair." The old woman looked at the chieftain. "I think they understand that." And Aunt Leonis, I couldn't possibly just stay here and leave you to go back to Pharaoh all alone. I'm not at all sure that I could make the trip back to Pharaoh, Simon. I'm too old for jet travel. I don't think my heart could stand the journey back. But Boz, what about Boz? We can't just desert Boz. Boz is dead, Simon. The boy put his hands over his eyes. No, it was too much. Bitter tears forced their way through his fingers. He felt a gentle but firm pressure on his shoulder, and Umar's and I said, "It is late. The Phair is tired from his ordeal. He needs refreshment and rest. He will be ministered to by one of the Omaras, and then he will spend the night with Waldy in her dwelling. Tomorrow, when he is rested, he will see more clearly." "What am I to do?" Simon cried. He turned desperately to Umar's and I. "Sir, Quentin Phair is my ancestor. He is long dead. I am his descendant. I have all his faults." Umar's and I smiled placidly. "And you have returned to us, as you promised you would. The Umara recognized you as the one. We welcome you." Hurtado and Talus remained on the beach after the village had settled down. The dark night of the jungle was heavy around them. "But there are hardly any insects," Hurtado exclaimed. "What do they do?" "Whatever it is, if they could bottle it, they could make a fortune," Talus replied. "You really are all right?" Hurtado asked. "Don't you think we should see a doctor?" "I have. These people with their gift have something that hasn't been around in modern medicine for a long time. Whatever they used on my wound has completely taken away the infection. I am convinced that I could walk on my leg now, but they will not permit it, and I trust their judgment. Hurtado, if you wish to remain my friend, you will say nothing about their caring places." "There is certainly no reason why I should say anything," Hurtado said. "Vermeer, too, would take it ill, and I wish to remain friends with both of you. So Vermeer was right about Gutierrez. There are 2 young men of Quistano blood who are willing to testify against him." "An unpleasant character," Talus understated. "He certainly never expected that Simon and I would survive the jungle, and we nearly didn't. But it doesn't get us any closer to finding the murderer, doesn't it? I rather think it does. From all the bits and pieces I've gathered, I've been able to get a pretty clear picture." Hurtado looked at him and waited. Talus's face gleamed whitely in the starlight. "We know that Forsyth Phair was not in fact Forsyth Phair, but Fernando Propice, a Venezuelan of mixed blood, largely Levantine, long involved in smuggling, extortion, and any nasty business that came to hand, right?" "Correct," Hurtado agreed. "And that no bank in Caracas has either a Forsyth Phair or a Fernando Propice on the records." "Correct. The murderer, I would guess, dabbled in smuggling and got involved with Propice, who tried to drag him in further than he wanted to go. The murderer wanted out, and the only way was to dispose of Propice." "And who is this person? Do you know, or is it all guesswork?" "It's largely guesswork." "Are you going to let me in on it, or do I have to find out in my flat-footed way?" Talus's smile gleamed. Phair, Propice, was the boss in this smuggling operation. He was almost making it. Gutierrez was his sidekick. The murderer got tangled with them, but he didn't want to kill anyone, or to get involved in drugs or chemicals. When he told Gutierrez that he no longer wanted to play his game, Gutierrez took off with Simon and me, and told the man that he would kill us if he didn't keep his mouth shut. The murderer, being more squeamish than Gutierrez, was forced to keep quiet to avoid further bloodshed. Go on. Back to Propice. It seemed more than likely that what little Quistano blood remains in his veins went back a long time to Quentin Phair, in fact. I know that's what the old lady thinks. Umar's and I and Umara corroborate this. They knew him to be an evil and vindictive man, like Edmund in Lear, dwelling on rights he felt he ought to have, and willing to do anything to get what he thought he deserved. At one time, he took himself to Dragon Lake to claim the jewels of Quentin Phair had left the Umara, and which Propice thought were his due. What did happen to the jewels? They were sold, and the money used for education, universities, medical schools. So Propice felt abused there, too. As Quentin's heir, he was due everything that benefits the heir, the long-spent fortune, the portrait, Of course the portrait, and the ancient grudge. Hurtado looked across the lake at the peaceful stork-like dwellings. Violence and vengeance seemed out of place. He sighed. I think you're probably right, Tom. There are natures worth enough actually to be more proud of the ancient grudge than any other part of the inheritance, and it fits in with what Dr. Wordsworth told me. But you haven't pointed to the murderer. Half of Venezuela would have a motive. Simon gave me the first clue, with the story of the key to cabin 5, the cabin with the portrait, yes, and Jan's foolish lie. Geraldo is convinced that Jan is lying to protect someone. I think that Jan did not lie. Then Boone did. Where is your evidence? I don't have enough, but Boone's winter uniform vanished. A winter uniform is less visible in the tropical dark than summer whites. It would have been easy for Boone to weigh down and dump it on the bottom of the ocean. The key story was an attempt, a successful one as it turned out, to implicate Jan, and so was the placing of the portrait here. How did he manage that? Easily enough. It was on the bridge in the small hours of the night. He could have lowered it into the water without being seen. So could anybody else. It was Boone who was alone on the bridge, the only one watching the radar scan. A fishing boat could easily come right up to the Orion. A portrait could be lowered, and no one the wiser. This is guesswork. Back to Propice for a moment, then. It's all part of the pattern. He paid or blackmailed someone to run Simon down with the forklift. And that little scheme was foiled by Polly. So then Propice ordered Boone to push Simon overboard. Boone probably refused to kill, and then Propice threatened him until he thought he had no choice. Geraldo's talk of reluctance, Hurtado said. Yes, it fits. I see Boone moving slowly to the boy with a heavy heart. For he appears to be a foolish rather than an evil man, Alejandro. And when Geraldo stopped him, and he did not have to complete an action which was totally repugnant to him, he decided the only way out was to kill Phair. What about the portrait? It's probably Propice's hold over him. If Boone didn't play along, Propice would pin him for smuggling. Easy enough to do if he was already in Propice and Gutierrez's net. My theory is that Boone intended his smuggling to be a strictly onshore business. It seems that his tastes are fairly expensive, and he wanted to pick up a little extra cash. Also, he knows something about art. Plausible, Hurtado said. We're fairly certain that the art ring is centered in Port of Dragons. It probably seemed innocent enough at first, but the innocent don't stay innocent when they think they can stay on the edge of crime. Drug dealers aren't worried about anybody's conscience, nor would it concern a Gutierrez that Boone would try not to do anything which would reflect on the master of the ship. You have a vivid imagination, Tom, Hurtado said. Imagination does not hold up in court. No, but you agree with me, Tallis said. You arrested Jan on the gamble that the murderer would then betray himself, or that he would not let someone else hang. I think your gamble will pay off. There's not much time. I don't think Boone will let Jan take the rap. He got into deeper waters than he intended, and he ran scared. I think he will stop running. He'd better stop soon. Then I can play for time. He'd better stop soon, then. I can play for time for only so long. What we have to do is find a way to turn an imagination into evidence. He looked about him through the velvet dark. This is an incredible place. Not so incredible as all that. We who have spent our lives in cities tend to forget that human beings were not meant to live in anthills. Only insects can manage to survive in such conditions, and our work does not often take us among the innocent, Alejandro. We have been overexposed to the darker reaches of the human heart. Hurtado continued to look out over the lake to the dwellings. They expect the boy to remain here. Yes. They don't really think that he is Quentin Phair? They don't think about such things the way we do. Because Simon is Quentin Phair's direct descendant, he partakes in his ancestor and can fulfill his destiny. They won't force him. Alejandro, Tallis said, this is simply something I don't want to think about tonight. It strikes me as being a far more difficult problem than finding the murderer of Propice, for which you really don't need me. As soon as you had all the information, You would have put two and two together exactly as I have done. But Theo sent for me, and I came, and I think that I came because of Simon, a boy you've never heard of. He needed me, Alejandro. He has been far more wounded than I, and it occurs to me that perhaps the Cristianos are the only ones who can complete the healing. He appears perfectly healthy. He has been wounded in spirit. He attempted to hold on to an idol, and when he was forced to see him as a human being who lied and lusted and was as other men, it was like having the rug pulled out from under him. He has been exposed to murder. He has almost been killed himself. It has all been too much for him, Hurtado said. He has to grow up sometime. He is doing precisely that, Alejandro. What about the old lady? Hurtado asked. She is dying. I see. Yes, it will be difficult for the boy, but surely you can't think that staying here is a possibility. Why not? Tom, these people are, for all Vermeer says, a primitive Indian tribe. You do sound like a silly boy. Would you want your son, had he been through what Simon has been through, to live in Caracas or New York or Charleston? Haven't you seen something healthy in this place? He'll revert, Hurtado said. He'll be no better than a savage. And we? How much better than savages are we? Oh, have it your own way, Hurtado said. When will you be ready to be moved? By tomorrow, but I must stay here until my mind is at ease about Simon. 48 hours together in the jungle can forge a close friendship. And we will pause there.